We're here today with another wonderful author. This one, I believe, is um, short stories is really where you mainly live. I believe, is that right, Lance? One of the things I like to get out of the way in the beginning of an
For the
episode,
most part,
just
I'm working
because
on a
I
novel
get
now,
so
but
caught up in our
until
conversations.
recently, it's
I
all
like
been
to make
short
sure that
stories.
our audience knows how to find you. So, what is your website address so they can find you? Perfect. And I have to say that it's a name that flows off the tongue. It's very just so.
LanceRobinsonWriter.com. So that's and from
Say
there,
that's a
yeah,
name that flows off the tongue.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, and yeah, from there people can find my social media and subscribe to my website as my newsletter if they want and that kind of thing. But yeah, the easiest way to find me is LanceRobinsonWriter.com. Um, yeah, I've been promoting myself a little on social media, but it takes a fair bit of time away from writing, and so try not to do that too much. But yeah, the website is active for people who want to tune in. Um, I am a science fiction writer, and um, I have, as I said, mostly been writing short fiction. One of my stories won the Writers of the Future contest about 2 years ago, and then like a year and a half ago appeared in L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future Volume 40. Um, and I've been having short stories published in various magazines like and anthologies like Analog, which is one of the long-standing science fiction magazines, and anthologies like Think Weirder, a recent anthology that came out about 5 months ago. Um, I I tend to write environmentally themed hard science fiction, which means that I'm diving into the science a bit, but in I mean the kind of science fiction I write, I think, and the kind of science fiction that I like to read is not focused on the science or the technology. It's those are vehicles for telling the story, and so, but I'm often dealing with environmental themes and themes of human interconnectedness, our connectedness with each other, and our connectedness with nature.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I was having a chance to look at your website just briefly before I got our session started for this podcast interview. So you might have already touched on it because of our technical difficulties that took me away. But I noticed you have a book which looks like it's a collection of stories called Chasing New Suns. So
Yes,
I would
yeah,
love to know about that.
that's my own short story collection, Chasing New Suns. It's available in all the usual places books are available. Um, I have been writing short stories going back for ages. I think I had my first publication in a magazine in 1990. Um, Last year, I guess now, well, 2 years ago now, I decided to pull together my best short stories and put them together in a collection. So the except for two of the stories are set in the same world. All the rest are different. So it's mostly um, independent, self-standing, standalone stories. Um, all science fiction, mostly hard science fiction, but some near future speculative fiction as well. They're fairly diverse, but as I was starting to hint at, I guess a unifying theme is connectedness, human interconnectedness, and a lot of the stories are about people trying to see how to live in the world. What's their role, and what does it mean to live a good life? What should I do? So often wrestling with moral questions and philosophical difficulties.
Now, it's I find it interesting. and maybe it's a study in personality types, I don't know, but I find it hard to write a short story. To develop a story within just, a set limit, um, for me is a challenge. So how are you able? Is that by design that you just wanted short stories, or how does your mind work? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
It took some learning and some discipline and training. Like if I had just followed the flow completely, I think I would be writing 800-page novels. Um, but I mean, at the time I started, and I don't know if this is probably not quite as true now. At the time I started writing and publishing short stories was an entry into the market as a writer, and publishers often, they were less likely to look at you if you didn't have some writing credits already. And so writing short stories is sort of a natural progression. I found that I love the short story as an art form. I like writing short stories, and I enjoy working on the novel that I'm working on now. But they feel very different. Feel like very different art forms. I think they're different from the reader's perspective, but I think they're also different from the writer's perspective. And there's something satisfying about like making a small sculpture that I can hold in my hands and with a limited amount of time, and then I finished it and I can hold it and I can look at it, and yes, this came out the way I want. It's this perfect little piece of beauty, hopefully, and but it's very different than a novel, which is like a novel is like a journey, a sometimes painful journey with twists and turns and forks in the road.
Absolutely. You know, and I wonder if short stories don't have the advantage in today's world where people's attention span is so limited or their time is so limited, as the case may be. You get that little short story, you've got satisfied that urge just for that moment of escape, but it's encapsulated, it's done. Just like someone who sits down to watch I don't know, a movie compared to reading a book, or a TV show compared to watching a movie.
I think so, and I myself am not immune to shrinking attention spans. So I've usually got a couple of anthologies or short story collections in my reading pile, and uh, sometimes I get to a point where I want to dive into something. I want to read a novel, but often it's yeah, I can't imagine having the freedom to in my brain to the time to dive into this, but I've got time to sit down and read a short story.
Absolutely. I had a thought that just completely went out the window. Let me see if I can recapture something here. Um, oh, this is what I was thinking about. So you, part of writing, especially short stories, trying to get things out there, is also to get the reviews, to gain the readership, to get people interested, so that when you have more to say, they'll be there waiting for you. Like, what's he gonna say next? What story is he gonna put out? So one thing I've noticed with some of my stories that I've done is, of course, you get your good reviews, you get your people who are like, whatever. Um, have you ever encountered a reader who says, I was all set for this story, but then, the end was predictable, I guess, because that happened with one of my stories. And I
Mm,
think, well, yeah, sometimes life can, I mean, there's a pattern. You're gonna see something happening,
sure.
hopefully not too soon. But I mean, what's been your experience?
I mean, I've had a few negative reviews here and there, and I mean, I'm thinking of some of the more recent ones. I mean, none of them are pointing to predictability. They were
Mhm.
pointing to other problems. Yeah, I mean, tastes are diverse, and so I mean, I've heard the advice a writer should never seek out to read their reviews. Um,
Right.
I've got a fairly thick skin,
Mm.
and I try to be humble, but once in a while, like, I want to know what they said about me, and so I do seek them out sometimes, and it's when I come across the good ones, the ones who had something positive to say and got something enjoyable from something I wrote. It's I find it very uplifting, and I'm I'm willing to I'm willing to once in a while experience a critical review if for that experience of reading the positive ones.
Right. Well, and sometimes the critical review, while we don't love them, sometimes it actually can be constructive and it makes you pause and say, okay, was that an issue? Is that something I can learn from? And that's kind of where I was going with. But I come down to if you have sketched out a personality or someone in a certain predicament, there's only so many paths you can choose for that natural progression within those circumstances, just like in life. So, that's
Yeah,
where I go, okay, was it predictable? In my case, it was in relation to a story that had it was a prequel for a story that already exists. So it has to follow a certain path to get where you're
sure.
going to connect with the book. But I just was curious from an author standpoint, what challenges I guess have you faced similar to that?
Sure. And I mean, I don't think, I mean, as a writer, I don't think being unpredictable is really the right goal to adopt. If it works for your story, having some kind of serious, mind blowing plot twist can be very interesting, but not all books have that. There there are turns and unexpected events, but that's different than basing the whole story on a plot twist. Some plot twist stories can be really amazing and very enjoyable. But there's other reasons to tell stories as well, and it's I mean sometimes what you're doing is you're painting a picture, and you're painting that picture of a character, of a human being, and you're going into depth. And the more the reader learns about that character, the more they feel they know them. And then when certain things happen, they may or may not be predictable, but if the writer's done their job, the reader will nod and say, "Yeah, I get it. That's why that character would do that."
Absolutely.
So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about uh, predictability.
That's nice to hear. And I guess when I think about it, it's just like when you go on a road trip. Maybe you've been to that same place in the past. You know the road, the travel. Do you enjoy the journey any less because you're already familiar with the way things are going to progress? You know.
Sure. Well, and I mean, take the first Star Wars movie, right? As soon as you learn there's a princess to be rescued and this farm boy is there with the space wizard, you know he's going to successfully rescue the princess.
Right.
That doesn't do anything to destroy the enjoyment of that film.
Yeah, so true. And you carry that right on to any other, the Princess Bride or whatever the case. Yeah, you
Yeah.
still enjoy that story for all the little gems along the way. It's yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I like your analogy. That's exactly spot on. Because otherwise, what's the point of telling a new story? It's if people are going to look at it and go, well, yeah, it was predictable. Well, certain things in life should be predictable to some extent. We
Yeah.
like a little tease, a little surprise, a little variation, but ultimately, you're not picking up that Star Wars movie or The Princess Bride or whatever because you're expecting something completely different. You know what you're getting. So, so let's get back to your books because I took us off on kind of a really big tangent there. So, in what you've written so far, do you have any favorites or recommendations for readers? Like, what would you most recommend someone reading your work for the first time?
Well, so I only have the one short story collection of my own published. I've got short stories in a couple of anthologies, and they're out there in magazines. But the magazines get harder to find, a year after they're published. But if someone is to pick up Chasing New Suns, I guess I always there's two stories in there that, depending what side of the bed I wake up on, one or the other is usually my favorite story. Um, one of them is called 5 Days Until Sunset. That's the story that with which I won the Writers of the Future contest. That is, on its surface, it's a story about colonists from Earth arriving on a planet on a distant star system. And it's one of these planets that's tidally locked to the star. As the planet goes around the sun, the same faces towards the star uh, all the time. I'm in my spare time, I'm a big astronomy buff, and so I've been, I watch astronomy YouTube channels and that kind of thing. And as astronomers have been discovering more and more planets around other star systems, tidally locked planets like that are expected to be really common. Just as like our moon does the same thing with us, our moon shows the same face to us as it goes around. So they arrive on this planet expecting to live in the twilight portion. It's right under where it's like permanent noon. It's too hot to live. On the dark side of the planet and the night side of the planet, it's minus 60. So, but there's life right in that ring where it's like permanent sunrise or sunset. And they arrive expecting that's what the world's going to be like. And they very shortly, within the span of a couple of days, realize this world is not what we expected. It's something different. So at a deeper level, really, I'm asking questions about why does it take human beings so much difficulty to do what we know we need to do? When the facts are before us and we know what course of action we need to take, sometimes we just find it so hard to take that step towards the obviously correct decision. I think we do that individually in our lives. I've often been in situations where I know what I need to do, but I really don't want to do it. And collectively too, like climate change is a good example. Technically, climate change is not that difficult a problem to address, but we just don't seem collectively to want to do it. So I think science fiction is a useful tool for through metaphor, analogy, taking a problem of our world today, or a problem of human beings of any time, and placing it in a different world, kind of in a way disarms the reader. And so that's what I do in 5 Days Until Sunset.
I like the sound of that. I'm curious. So behind you, of course, you have it looks like a book collection award picture, but there's a picture. There's two on the wall, and it's the one that's
Yep.
on the far left, and it's kind of like a nighttime scene, and I can't see it in super detail, but I look at that and think, okay, this has to maybe if you're blocked, a great source of inspiration to kind of unlock your mind as you're writing your stories, because it just looks like it's science fiction, kind of almost like a book cover that I'm looking
It
at.
is. Well, they're both book covers. The
Okay.
other one is a cover of one of my favorite novels, um, "The Sheep Look Up" by John Brunner. But the one you're talking about, the more colorful one,
Yes.
is that's a product also of Writers of the Future. So the Writers of the Future contest, they have a parallel illustrators contest, and so each year 12 writer winners are selected, and 12 illustrator winners. And then they put the publisher, Galaxy Press, puts them together in an anthology each year. And the illustrator winners are each assigned to one of the short story winners, and that illustrator has to do an illustration for that story. And so that was the illustration from 5 Days Until Sunset. And so the Steve, the illustrator for that. I wondered what he was going to do. I assumed he would read the story and pick a scene from the story, and I was wondering which scene would he pick. And he didn't really do that. He took he's like, what he illustrated really is if I had kept telling the story after the end, it's like that's what would be happening next. And he's like, he's writing what happens next after the end of the story, and he's doing it in a way that like it captures what the story is about. I was so amazed by that.
I'll say it's a striking picture. I mean, that's why it drew my attention. So, does it inspire you to possibly in the future write like a sequel or a full blown novel based on that initial short story?
Yes, so I started thinking about turning that story into a novel, and so in fact, that story was actually a prequel to a short story I'd written like 20 years earlier, um, and it was published in a small magazine. Um, and then after I won Writers of the Future, I started thinking, I think there's a wealth of ideas in this scenario that I've created of this planet that doesn't rotate. Um, and I started thinking of other possibilities and storylines, and so started sketching out a novel. And then I decided, I want to tell the story of what led up to that. So the novel that I'm working on right now is actually a prequel to 5 Days Until Sunset,
Ah, okay.
and it's about how those colonists get exiled from Earth and why they get exiled from Earth.
Very cool.
Um, so yeah,
Okay. All right. So that's what's currently what you're working on is that prequel, and are you sketching
yes,
things for after that prequel to then like maybe turn that into a full series of full length novels?
yes, I think so. The 5 Days Until Sunset, I've already got some ideas as to what that would look like as the core of a novel, and I think there's a lot of possibilities there. So yeah, even I've got a few ideas for what the third novel in the series would be.
I love that. I love the way that the creative mind works, where you start with one idea and you're like, this is good, but oh, here's this idea that should have come before here, and here's what I can do. I mean, I love when have this inspiration and I'm trying to plot out the direction the story's going to go and how many books it's going to cover. I have yet to finish a series, but I have several mapped out that on my to-do list, and it's such a fun thing to just kind of plot it all out in your mind how you want this to progress. But
Yeah, well, I find that fun, and I find the world building fun,
yeah,
and yeah, just imagining the culture, imagining the. I mean, if I'm dealing with another planet, I can imagine the ecology and the geology and other things like that, um, philosophy and language and economics, and just weaving that together can be very exciting. And sometimes I have to stop myself and say, okay, time to actually to write the story.
or live in the real world for a few minutes because we have no choice. We have
Yes,
to do that, right?
yeah, yeah.
As nice as it is
No,
to get into our own worlds.
no, and I'm definitely not like at the extreme of J.R.R. Tolkien, who's like invented fully fledged languages and and thick book mythologies that there were precursors to everything in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I'm not that bad, but I'm tempted some days to go that direction.
Getcha. I mean, when we're very interested in something, it can be kind of all absorbing. So you've had this interest in astronomy and you've made a study of the stars and planets and such. I find, and maybe it's the 50-50 here, but usually if people are interested in that area of science, they are also science fiction fans, growing up watching like Star Trek, Star Wars, so on. And I know you already brought up the whole Star Wars thing with Luke and Leia, but where are you on all of that? Are you purely Star Wars? Are you Star Trek? Are you the whole gamut of all
Oh,
the
that
sci-fi?
question. Oh, the Star Wars versus Star Trek question.
Why
Didn't
not?
warn me about You didn't warn me about that one. I love them both, but for very different reasons. And I love Star Trek for the same reason that I love like the science fiction novels that I read early in my life. The same reason I love Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov and Frank Herbert. That's why I love Star Trek. Star Wars, the original three movies, I I think of them as fantasy. They're fantasy. They're epic fantasies. Happen to be set in outer space, but you've got an apprentice wizard and his mentor, and you've got monsters and dragon type things. You've got princesses. You've got an evil king, and and there's an adventure happening. And so the first three Star Wars movies particularly were um, I, I see them as space fantasy, and I love them as space fantasy. But if I'm interested in philosophy or some deep moral question and a new perspective on it, I think you're more likely to get that from science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not that fantasy does sometimes tackle social kinds of issues, but I think that for me, it's like that's what I grew up loving about science fiction is how it would bring me into a world and then realize, okay, this is a story about racism, or this is a story about politics and power, and I could see analogies here to our world, um, and posing those questions in unique ways that I might have got defensive if someone tried to make an argument in a certain direction that didn't fit my beliefs, but presented to me as a science fiction stories. Oh, okay, you tricked me there, but you did it in a very enjoyable way. So I'm going to think about those ideas the way you presented them.
Yeah, it's funny how that sometimes, well, 9 times out of 10, there is that underlying, the author has a specific idea in mind, and sometimes their audience will catch what the author's talking about, what those underlying meanings. Or sometimes they might come up with ideas completely different from the author, but still accurate, based on their interpretation of what the author wrote. So it's an interesting thing. I asked you about the Star Trek thing because of your description of the planet in that book, and I'm gonna butcher the title. 5 days till
5 days until sunset.
until sunset. I wanted to say Sunday. I knew that wasn't right. So 5 days till sunset. So this planet that only faces one, side, that has the hot and the cold, like our moon, reminded me of the planet Reman or Remus, in the Romulan Empire. The Remans,
Mm.
that because that was basically
Yes.
kind of how their planet was, which make it, science is what science is. That was bound to be that common thing, but it reminded me of that, which is why I
Well,
got to that
and you know what
question.
I didn't know is the the first science fiction story that used that as a premise was, and I'm not going to remember the name of the author, but it was written back in the 1930s.
Hmm.
I only discovered that later. The I mean, we've recognized for a long time that our moon does that for us, but yeah, back in the 1930s, one of those golden age writers applied that idea to another planet and then wrote a story about it. Um, so yeah, I mean the premise itself is not new, but so here I'll throw in the spoiler, which is not really a spoiler because it comes in like halfway through the story. They realize after being there for like a couple of days, they realize their interpretation of the 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 probe data scanned the planet when, like a small probe was sent to the star system like 100 years earlier and sent its data back. They had misinterpreted it, and the planet is not tidally locked. It's just rotating very, very slowly. And they
Oh.
realized one day is 15 years. But their measurements were right on, because if night is 7.5 years long, it does get down to minus 60, and their measurements of that were correct. And on the daytime, it is plus 70. So I'm talking Celsius here. And so it's unlivable where it's noon, and it's unlivable where it's midnight. But they can't just live at this one spot, which is permanent twilight, because it's not permanent twilight. And so that's where the title comes from, 5 days until sunset. They see the sun, and after a couple of days, they realize the sun is setting, and they recalculate and realize we're going to freeze if we stay here. It's going to, in 3 more days, the sun is going to be set, and we'll freeze. And so how can we build our colony, or how can we build houses and start farms? Because now we have to be nomads. We have to keep walking, and we don't have to walk very far. Depending on what latitude you're at. If you're at the equator, maybe 5 kilometers a day. If you're at a higher latitude, then maybe you only need to walk 2.5 kilometers a day to go around the sun, but to stay at the spot where it's livable. And so that's part of the challenge they're facing. It's like, how can we possibly do this? Are we going to become nomads? Like, does that mean we're abandoning all of our technology? We're abandoning all of our plans to establish farms and a city? How do we deal with this?
I
So that's where the
love this
challenge comes from.
premise. I love that they think they're going to be stable, but then they're going to have to be nomadic.
Yeah.
I have this idea, and it's yours if you want it, but I'm just like, wow, if you have another book about another planet where maybe half the time they're underwater. I just think, wow, that could be an interesting thing too. How do we build the city underwater? Anyway, maybe that's too far fetched. But I love the premise, though, of them having to find a way to have a nomadic lifestyle, be able to produce food, because obviously, if you're living on a planet, you're gonna have to grow
Yep.
crops somehow,
Yep.
whether it's hydroponics or something else. But yeah, how do you make that whole situation livable without freezing or frying? Yeah, amazing.
So
So
that's why, and so starting to think through the possibilities for that that's where I get sucked into the world building and say, okay, well, what the ecology be like? All right, so we're assuming animals are migratory as well, and what would
water
the weather be
sources.
like, and water sources, and what does it look like when the night part of the planet on the morning side is starting to turn into the sun, and that's whatever was there starting to melt. Um, and so yeah, that's where I occasionally have to pull myself out of the world building and work on the story again.
Do you have family that you bounce these thoughts off of, and what do they think sometimes when you share what you've either already written or what you're thinking about writing?
Um, Not family so much. My kids, they're not big readers. I mean, we tried to read to them we did read to them a lot as they were growing up, but they're they're into movies, and my daughter's into horror, so she's not much into science fiction. Um, so I do have there's a really wonderful writing community in the city I live in, Thunder Bay, Ontario. So there's a lot of other writers here, and it's a really strong community. So we share a lot. Um, I, I'm also in touch with some of the writers from Writers of the Future, and the other winners from that year. One thing I didn't mention about the Writers of the Future contest is each year they bring the 12 writer winners and the 12 illustrator winners to Los Angeles for a week-long workshop. And
Nice.
that workshop is taught by for the writer, some of the top names in science fiction and fantasy, and for the illustrator, some of the top uh, illustrators and graphic artists and book cover designers there are. So so me and the other writers, like, we had a week together and built a really supporting community. And then the wider community of there's alumni from each year, and that Writers of the Future uh, community going back 42 years now is really supportive of each other. So there's also people there who I bounce ideas off of. And yeah, me and one of the other writers from my cohort of the contest just recently exchanged short stories to critique each other and get feedback.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, I got building some of those kind of supports and sounding boards and so on.
So you mentioned a little bit ago, I think that one of your first stories, or at least one of your early stories, was 20 years ago. So is that when you began writing with the intent to publish, or was that more just writing for enjoyment at that point in time?
Um, I think I by the time I finished high school, I wanted. I mean, before I finished high school, I wanted to be a writer, and so I was moving in that direction. Even I mean, I started a novel in high school, and I think I actually finished it. I think, if I remember, like in my first year of university. It was awful, but um,
Got to start somewhere.
uh, got to start somewhere. And then a creative writing class. I took a creative writing class, but you had to audition for this creative writing class. It was like in the university English department, but you had to audition for it, and you auditioned by writing a short story. And so the the short story that I wrote to audition for that creative writing class, a few years later, after a few rewrites and reworking of the story, became my first publication. Um, so yeah, I've been aiming. I took a break, had kids, went back to university, um, and other things filled up my life. And for a while, I didn't do much writing. But after 8 years living in Kenya, moved back to Canada about 4 years ago, and um, with that big change, and the kids were older and didn't need as much of my attention, I felt it was also time to come home to writing, and so got back into it, and that's when I wrote the and found I think for the most part, I life experience and whatnot, I had become a better writer.
I
And
believe that.
and I've been, yeah, trying to work at it seriously ever since.
Yeah. So your time in Kenya certainly must have had some influence on your writing. I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I was a scientist with an organization called the International Livestock Research Institute. Um, my professional background is social science. So I was a social scientist. I was surrounded by livestock specialists and ecologists and other folks in the hard sciences, but I was a social scientist, and I worked a lot with nomadic pastoralists, livestock keepers, so camel herders and goat herders and so on. Um, I've got a short story now looking for a publisher that's set in Kenya. The novel that I'm working on now, which is the prequel to 5 Days Until Sunset. It's the novel set on Earth. It's about these colonists as they're about to get exiled. It's set partly in Kenya, um, and it was. I mean, Kenya was the most recent place in Africa I've lived. My first experience was in the Gambia, and so I've got one of my other short stories in my collection, "Chasing New Suns," is set partly in the Gambia, um, and I mean, Africa just it had a big impact on me. I mean, I lived probably 12, 13 years in total, plus other when I was living in Canada, short trips to Africa for shorter projects. Um, really fell in love with the place the first time I went, and it's even though I'm working in a slightly different field now, it's still a big part of my memory and who I am.
I believe it. I can't imagine anyone going to Africa, especially Kenya and South Africa, and not having have that really affect your viewpoint on just life on this planet, and just seeing the animal life there alone would be amazing.
Sure. Well, yeah, East Africa, particularly Kenya and Tanzania, are amazing in that respect. Uh, the 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 wildlife that I grew up watching on Saturday morning wildlife shows on TV. It's like right there, like just drive into the park and they're just like right there outside of your window. So that's amazing. Um, I mean, my first attraction, my first experience in Africa was in the Gambia, a tiny little country in West Africa, and my what I fell in love with there was the culture and the people, and just this so gregarious and friendly and outgoing. It was so easy to make friends, and just this warmth and music in the air everywhere. Um, and yeah, I mean that was part of how I fell in love with the continent and the cultures there.
Absolutely. Now, your website had mentioned something, and I forget the details of it, but I remembered you commenting about apartheid. And I remember that conflict when I was a kid. That was big news in the early to mid late 80s. I feel like 83 to 85 is the time frame in my head. Um,
Yeah.
so you were down there around that time period, and it's affecting your books in some respect, but I'm not sure in what respect.
Well, sure. So I was, I think it was the second time I was in the Gambia. I went back again. I went back to university to do a master's degree and organize things to do my field research in the Gambia. And so I went and was in the Gambia for 8 months, I think, at that time. And that was 93, 94. And that's 93, 94 is right around the time when apartheid was starting to fall, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And Gambia is far away. It's as far away from South Africa as I'm guessing, but as uh, Canada is from Panama. It's the other end of the continent. But still, everywhere in Africa, like we were all glued to the news. They were watching this when apartheid fell. We were celebrating together, and so one of the short stories that I wrote and subsequently published in a magazine is a science fiction story. It's set in a sort of it's a kind of a multiverse story. It's set in an alternate version of our world. Uh, Set a few years after our time, um, or the time we were in when apartheid had just fallen. Is set a few years after the fall of apartheid, but in that world, apartheid didn't fall, and the story is sort of about these different worlds in this multiverse starting to encounter each other, and a character in this world where you still had this horrible oppressive system getting a glimpse of a better world where we were starting to turn towards justice. And so that's one of the stories that's in Chasing New Suns.
Very cool. So going back to your 5 days until sundown story, or any of the short stories on these planet or on this planet, are there any indigenous life, aliens there already living, or is this like unpopulated, there's only the animal life, the water life?
So they do not encounter any intelligent life, but part of the shock when they first wake up from their interstellar hibernation is seeing that there is Earth life on this planet, and that's part of the mystery they're trying to figure out is why is there Earth life on this planet, and that also becomes part of how part of how they realize that the planet is in fact rotating. It's not completely tidally locked. As they realize the Earth animal species they're seeing are all migratory species, and so part of the story is them reaching back into their history and reflecting on these legends they heard about how 10,000 years earlier, the story set like 12,000 years in the future. Reflecting how 10,000 years earlier, their legends tell of ships heading out from Earth to plant life and other star systems.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a very tricky thing to do. Okay. Well, we're getting ready to close out, but as you were expecting, there is this random question.
Right.
So the last guest asked, whatever your craft, do you have to be in a certain mood to do it?
Um, yes and no. It helps, and part of how I do that is like I've developed this habit of any story, like whether it's a short story or novel, anything I'm working on, I identify a song, a recording, and that becomes like my mood music for that piece. And I don't listen to it like every time I sit down at the typewriter, but like 3 or 4 times a week, I will, before I write, I sit and I just calmly listen to that piece of music. But I think part of making that transition to being a professional writer as opposed to just a hobbyist is your job is to write. So sometimes you're not in the mood, but it's your job, so you sit down and you do it anyway. And and I think that you learn how to not let your moods, block the creativity flowing from your brain down into the keyboard.
Which anticipates the question that came to my mind about the quality of the work when you're really not in a creative frame of mind. So it's possible
Well,
to
and
still have
so
high
I
quality.
keep tasks. Yeah, there's tasks I keep ready, and sometimes like I'm more of a plotter. I tend to plan things out and I sketch things out before I start writing. I mean, not religiously so, but I'm more of at the plotter end of the spectrum, the pantser end of the spectrum. But sometimes, yeah, uh, I'm in the mood to just write, and so I sit down and I pick some. I think I needed a scene here. I don't remember exactly what I thought it was going to be. Never mind. I'm just going to sit and write. And other times there's editing that needs to be done, and other times there's a bit of world building. Sometimes there's like continuity, and it's, oh, I wrote this here, but I seem to remember I said something different happened in earlier. So sometimes, depending on the mood, I'll pick a different task.
That makes sense to me. I was thinking editing would have to be my go-to if I was not in a creative mood. I just, mm-mm. Sometimes you just can't
Yeah.
force it. The story has to flow.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
cool. Well, do you have a question for the next guest?
I do. Okay. So, the world today is fraught with division, strife, and anger. How do you see your role as a creator in today's conflicted world?
Right now, I wish I knew how to do shorthand.
I can email it to you as well, but do you want me to repeat it one more time?
Would
Maybe
you?
there's
That would
other
be helpful,
writers.
just to make sure I've got this right. I think I've got it, but
Yeah, well,
yes,
and
please.
if there's other writers listening to this, or artists or whatnot listening to your show, maybe they should think about this as well. The world today is fraught with division, strife, and anger. How do you see your role as a creator in today's conflicted world?
Perfect. It's a conflicted world. Yeah, those added descriptives are key to that question, and I had the basic question, but those descriptives
Mm,
definitely needed to be in there. So thank you for repeating that.
good.
I've really enjoyed having you here today. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about your books and about the way your ideas flow. I'm hoping that your book will have a lot of success and you'll be back at some point to tell us about your next book.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, well, we're going to say goodbye to our
I've
audience.
enjoyed the
Please,
conversation. Yeah.
I'm so glad, me too. Be sure to
Mm.
check out Lance's website, his Facebook, his Instagram channels, and if there's anything else out there in the way of social media, it's on his website. But thank you. Please like, share, let people hear this interview with Lance. Good having you.
Thanks. Bye, Zoe.
Bye bye.